Hello guys, hey, it's me, Sean Astrom, and today I'm going to show you guys how we can make a car paint shader inside of Cinema 4D using Corona Renderer. Now I'm going to show you guys two ways. One's pretty darn simple, and the other is a little more advanced. So, I'm going to hop over to Cinema here, and as you can see, I kind of have a blank scene here. I do have this car model that I'm going to bring in here in a second, and we can work with that. But to start off, I'm going to bring in a good old sphere object, and I'm going to show the geometry here. I want to turn off render perfect. I'm going to crank up these segments to 128 so I have a little more geometry to work with. I'm going to scale this guy down, and I'm going to drop it to the floor here, and then I'm going to bring in a large ground plane here, and let's just crank up the size of this here real quick. Now, first things first, I probably need to set up Corona as my render engine, so I'm just going to select that here, and I'm also going to lower these settings here, or the resolution rather, to 896 by 504. It's just kind of a nice resolution I found for doing these web tutorials. So, but if I go over to my performance settings here, and I want to change the max interactive rendering passes to 25 so that I'm not burning up a bunch of CPU juice while I am rendering here. So if I bring in a light, set to area, that is good. I'm going to crank up the size a little to maybe 250 by 250, and I'm going to add a target tag. I'm going to target the sphere object, and let's bring this light over here, and that's probably good. And I'm going to turn off my garage shading and go back to, well, with lines, go back to the standard shading mode here, and let's fire up the IPR by hitting this little button. You can see what we got here, and if I go to tone mapping, I'm going to adjust my exposure control within here, and I'm going to just lower that to a value here. Okay, so anyway, you guys have all seen this kind of stuff before, but if I crank up the intensity of my light, this is cool, this is cool. I'm going to lower this guy down here a little bit, and yeah, so we got a ball and we got a light. Pretty exciting stuff. So, and let's adjust the exposure to -4 here. That's good. That's good. Okay. Excuse me, guys. Got a little frog in my throat there. So I'm going to show you guys a real quick way, probably the easiest way to make a car paint shader. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to create this video is there is no built-in Corona car paint shader. Like you get with Arnold or V-Ray or many of the other popular render engines out there. So the great thing is, though, it's not actually that hard to create one. So yeah, let's hop back in here, and if we just go to Corona here under the materials menu, now my layout might be different than some of yours, but just keep that in mind. So the easiest way to create a car paint shader is actually to use the skin material. Now this is kind of strange, you might think, but I'll show you what I mean here. So if we hop over here to the skin color, well, first the most important thing, we actually want to turn off SSS because we don't want subsurface scattering on a car paint shader. But if we just go over here and just under the basic tab and just uncheck subsurface scattering, that's where we want to start off. Now, if we go to the skin color, this is going to be our base paint color. So let's say we're doing a nice blue color, and I'm actually stop the interactive render preview here while we're building this shader. And I might one really handy thing, and you guys have probably seen this in some of my other videos. If you right-click on here, I can open up this window and get a much larger material preview. So that's sweet. So that's my base color. So that's all well and good. And now what we want to do is add a metallic reflection layer. And by default, under the reflection channel here in the skin shader, we actually get 2 specular lobes. And that's really the important thing for this easy car shader, is we have both of these specular channels here if you think of them that way. But for this metallic one, I'm actually going to crank up the index of refraction up to 100. And if we crank up the glossiness, you'll start to see that we basically have a mirror ball. And that's what we're going for. So if I lower the glossiness down to something like 0.76, that's all well and good. Here's where I can tint this metallic layer. So we could think of this as the second coating on a car paint job. So if I lower the level now to something like 25%, now we're getting a nice blending, if you will, of a nice metallic layer. So if I go to layer 2 here, this is going to act as my clear coat. So if I crank that up to 100 and then I crank up the glossiness to 0.97, let's say, for example, now automatically we have a nice clear coat. Now this does feel a little strong to me by default, so I think setting it to a lower blending value here, like 50% or even 25, because remember, this is a skin shader. It's designed to do skin, but you can, get away with doing wonderful car paints. So I'm going to plop this onto my sphere object, and let's fire up my IPR here. And voila, just like that, we have a double specular material that is looking pretty great. I'm going to crank up my light here a little bit, and I'm going to go to top view, and I'm going to hold down the control key, and I'm going to create a light copy, and let's select a warm color here, and actually let's make a nice cool color, and let's just crank this up a little bit more. Cool, that's looking pretty good. So if I select my light here, and I'm going to select both of them and do a uncheck visible directly, and then that will just hide these guys in our render view. So yeah, guys, so that's the easy way, the very easy way to create a car paint shader. I'm going to crank up the base coat saturation here. And yeah, guys, so that's looking pretty good for a basic car paint shader. Now, just so we have a nice car to look at here, I'm going to unhide this guy. This is a random car I got a while ago for a project, and I believe I got it off Turbo Squid. We'll hide this sphere here, and I'm going to just plop this onto the body and the doors. And yeah, you can see what we're getting here on an actual car model. Another thing I may do is bring in a subdivision surface and throw this guy in there, and we'll let this calculate. But it just subdivided our model. Looks like 3 times at render time. So if we re-act or re-enable the IPR, that should load up here. Beautiful. Now, scientifically, this might not be the most accurate car paint shader, but it looks pretty darn good to me. Our lights are a little hot, but we could also maybe say that the clear coat is a little bit too strong there, so I could lower that value. I could also lower the metallic layer a little bit. That's looking a little more natural and accurate to me. And just for fun here, let's make this metallic more of like a purpley color. That looks pretty cool. So yeah, guys, so that's one super simple way to make a car paint shader in Cinema 4D using Corona Render. Now, one other quick thing I will show you here is if we wanted to actually change this to a pearlescent car paint where you get the different colors at different glancing angles, all we actually need to do for that is under my texture here, I can throw in a Fresnel shader, and then I'm actually going to tint this Fresnel shader. So if I double click this guy, and let's do red on one end, and let's do kind of a yellowy color on the other. I'm making these colors pretty strong. And now what we're going to do is just set that guy to black. I don't think there's any blending going on there. Yeah, we're good. But and now if I crank this up to 100, you'll see kind of what we're getting there. And oh boy, yeah, you're starting to see we're getting that crazy, you see these kinds of paint jobs on a lot of hot rod type vehicles and things like that. But yeah, again, that's probably a little strong in the strength there. So again, you really kind of have to think about the way paint is created on a car, or how a paint job is actually done. You'd probably have a base coat for something like this of like an orangey color, maybe a little less saturated, maybe a little more, and maybe the reflective paint is layered on, something like that. But yeah, guys, so that's the super easy car paint shader inside of Corona for Cinema 4D. So real quick, we're going to move on to the Flakes layer. Now this is a slightly different process here, so we'll try and do this here as quickly as possible. I'm trying not to make this tutorial 47 minutes long, trying to keep it on the shorter side. So for the nice metallic flakes that you get in a car paint, I will show you guys how we can recreate that procedurally right here inside of Cinema. So, and Corona, of course. If I bring in a new material, we are going to call this guy, if I double click here, we're going to call this base. And yeah, we'll just call it base. And we're going to do blue again. So get a nice blue color here, looking good. And oops, we're also going to do on this guy, this base coat is also going to have our metallic first specular layer. So if we go over here to the reflection channel, we're going to want to do that same thing. Crank up the index of refraction to 100. We might want to tint this reflective paint layer, and we might want to lower the glossiness here. And then again, we have that nice level control, and we can adjust the strength of this layer, if you will, right here with this control. So that's the first step. And if we go over here to Corona, we actually want to bring in layered material. Now this is how we can kind of stack materials using Corona's own special layered material. And so we're going to pop this guy into the base material slot here. And then what we're going to do is create another new material, and we're going to call this one Clear Coat. And I'm going to select this guy here, and we're going to go reflection. We're actually going to uncheck diffuse, crank up reflection all the way to 100. And then for this, I do like to drop the glossiness down to like 0.98, 0.97, something like that. Because if you think about it, there's never any surfaces that are truly 100% reflective. So that should act a little more realistically. And so if we go, yeah, it doesn't really matter what order these are in. I'm just kind of picky. So we'll do the layered one first. We got our base, clear coat. Now I'm actually going to pop this into the second slot here, and we're going to put our flake shader, which we're going to build here next, in this first slot here. So let me just show you how this is working. If we crank up the amount to 1, you'll see that we are getting this shader over here. If we put the value to 0.5, which is the default, we're getting a blending here. Now, in order to blend these with a little more control, what you can do is pop in a Fresnel shader here. If we select it, we can set it to physical, and we can put in a physical IOR value here, and this will give us a more natural blending between these different shaders. So if I pop my layered material, we're going to go back to the sphere for a minute, and if I pop that guy on there and fire up the IPR here, you will see kind of what we're getting. Now, I do feel like that clear coat is feeling a little strong, so I could hop into the Fresnel here and just drop that a little bit. And you'll see if I put this value to 1, we're not really getting any at all. So if I really think if we're talking about physically accurate shaders, we would want this around 1.5. And You know, maybe my light might be a little bit bright, so I could drop that to 75. And my metallic layer also could be mixed too strongly here. So that's feeling much more natural. And just for fun, we're gonna do a cool shader here. So I'm gonna make that a little green. Cool, so on to the metallic flakes. This is the fun part. So we're gonna create a third layer here. So we got our base, this is gonna be called Flakes, of course. Wow, typing. So here's our flakes layer, and again, I'm gonna uncheck diffuse, we're gonna turn on reflection only, and we're gonna crank up the IOR value to 100. And let's do some gold flakes. So we're gonna do a nice yellowy tone here. And yeah, that's cool. So in order to make this work, we're gonna actually build all of this using Corona's own node system, which they actually developed on their own to work with inside of Cinema 4D with all of Cinema's built-in shaders, which is super sweet. So if we throw in our flakes material here, you'll see what we get here. Now, one interesting thing about the way this works is if I go to my layer shader here and I bring the flakes in here, slot number 2, and then I close this guy out, if we pop open here, this guy here, the node editor, you'll see we just have our flakes here. So if I bring in my layered material, you'll see now we're getting a nice graph that's showing everything that we got going on in the layered material here. So pretty cool. It works a little different than some other node-based editors, but it's designed to kind of work with Cinema 4D's layer shading system, at least the old layer-based shading system. As many of you probably know, in R20 there are now built-in nodes right inside of Cinema. But yeah, maybe we'll see if that stuff gets supported by third-party render engines sooner than later. I know they're kind of working on that, getting the SDK out there for other developers to be able to access all that stuff. But moving along here. So what we need to do for this Flakes shader is we need to, well, I'm going to do all this in the node graph here. Sorry guys, I've done this a few different ways, but we are going to do this right inside of the node editor here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a nice noise shader. And this is a Cinema 4D noise, and it is, you can parametrically map it without any seams right inside of Corona because it supports all of the built-in shaders, which is super fantastic. And I'm going to go down here to Cell Voronoi, and this is how we're going to get our nice flakes. And I'm going to crank up the contrast to like 50%. And this is pretty much how we're getting our flakes. Now the problem is we want to map this flakes shader onto the bump mapping channel inside of our flakes. But we want to convert this into a normal map. Now Cinema does have a wonderful normalizer shader, which will do that for us, but unfortunately that only works with two-dimensional shaders, textures that you import. Sorry, I'm going to take a sip of my tea here. So we're not going to use the normalizer. Instead, we're actually going to bring in a colorizer, which is the same equivalent to a ramp shader or a gradient shader in other render engines. But yeah, so we're going to plug our noise into the colorizer, and you can see what's going on there. It's mapping these color values. And what I'm actually going to do here is I am going to bring in a reference image here. So I'm going to hop into some files here, and I'm going to go to, I have this normal map example over here, and I grabbed this off of Wikipedia, and you guys can do that yourselves. But what we want to actually do is I'm going to just go through, and this is totally cheating. There's nothing scientifically accurate about this other than I'm trying to map on some normal color values onto these metallic paint chips that we're building here. So I'm going to just select my first little gradient here. And I may have to do this outside my capture window, guys, so sorry about that. But I'm going to just go through and start selecting some of these colors. Now I'm just going around this particular wheel here, and I'm going to select about 9 of these shades. And you'll kind of see what that's going to do here in a second. So I'm going to just grab one more knot here. And sorry guys, in order for this to work correctly with the sampling here, I have to kind of have this off screen here, unfortunately. So I'm just going through and selecting some random normal values. And we're just going down the line here, double clicking, grabbing this eyedrop, selecting a color. Wonderful. Now for this middle one, I'm actually going to select this base value, which essentially technically should mean that we're not getting any normals in any particular direction. This should be a normal value. You'll see what I mean by that here in a second. So if I double click this guy, I'm just going through the wheel here. I already selected that one. I'm going to go grab a little purpley color here. Now again guys, this is not, there's nothing technically correct about this. This is just one way that I have found to do this that works surprisingly awesome. So let's see here. I'm gonna go for a couple more because why not? So we'll get a nice green color here, and so I'm kind of, as you can see, I'm kind of going through this wheel of colors here, and again, it's not crazy scientific. It's just we're trying to get a random scattering of these normal direction colors. So you can see exactly what we're getting there, and that's pretty much what we want. So I do want this base normal color, this purple, which if you look at the values here, we got 127 red, 127 green, and 255 blue. That's essentially meaning that it's not going to have any effect, whereas these other colors are going to have an extreme effect. But I want this base normal color to have the strongest effect here. So yeah guys, so that's essentially how we build that normal conversion. So if I plug this guy into the bump map channel of our flakes, I'm going to just hop over here to this guy and see if I can't get a nice little preview. You can kind of see what we're getting here, and this is not what we want. We want to use Corona's normal shader that's going to be able to properly read these normals. So if I plug that guy into here and now bring it into the bump channel, you'll see if I refresh this guy, give it an update here. Sometimes these materials take a second to, oops, wrong one, to update. There we are. So here we are with the flake shader, and you can see how much different the effect now has on this guy. So I'm going to go back over to my layered guy. I'm going to, well, I don't think we actually, it doesn't really matter what material you're selected on here for these nodes to pull up. So if I go to my noise layer here now, I can lower the global scale to something like 25, so we get a much more, much smaller mapping here. Now, one important value, or one important thing I've discovered in building this shader, again, you can see what the noise scale is doing there. So a couple things. I'm going to crank up the bump strength to about 20, and you can see the effect it's going to have there. If this would auto update, there we go. And essentially it's simulating, using a normal map like this, it's simulating that these flakes are all rotated at different angles. That's all it's doing. And if we go back to our node view here, one thing that I have realized, well, I'm going to just see if I can demonstrate this real quick with a color here. So if I bring in that same normal value that's essentially supposed to be, 0, if I plug that into the texture here, you'll notice that if I crank this value up, that the normals are shifting quite drastically. And we're getting a little technical here, but that is because for whatever reason, and this could be something that might need to be changed with the final release of Corona, but it's reading in this as a non-linear map. So we need to actually bring in a Cinema 4D filter, plug this into here, plug this into our normal, and if I select this filter shader here, we're actually going to change the gamma to 2.2. So we're actually going to add in our sRGB gamma, you could call it. And now, if I go back to my Flakes shader, you'll see, even though this is cranked up to 1000%, the lighting is correct there. We're not getting any major shifts. We're getting a little shift, but nothing major, and that's what we want. So I'm going to hop back over to our node editor, and I'm going to plug in our nice colorize into here, and now you can see this shader we're getting. So it's a little bit lighter in color due to that gamma shift. Now the beautiful thing about the way we built this, guys, is since we're using Cinema 4D's built-in procedural noise, is we can change the seed value and we get a different shader. So that's awesome. So now, guys, all we got to do is hop over to our Flakes layer here. Let's bring in another preview. And I just like to work this way, guys, with these little you know, right-clicking and bringing up these bigger views. And I can see right off the bat here, I need to just really reduce the scale here on this guy. So let's get a little more organized. Now they do have a nice, we can do a sort all nodes command, which is great. And put this color way down here. We don't need that anymore. But let's just crank down our scale to something like 3.5. And now you guys can start to see this nice metallic flake layer. So if we go here, got a layered here, flakes. So same thing, guys. We want to map this in using the Fresnel, and we're going to go physical, and we're going to set this to like 2. And so if we open this guy, you can kind of see this nice metallic flake layer we are getting here. And let's go ahead and fire up the IPR and see what we're getting. And just like that, guys, we have some nice metallic flakes here. So a couple things. I'm seeing that our clear coat is way too strong, and there's several ways we can adjust that. We can do it here, or what I think might be a little easier is we can decrease the level in which that's affecting this. Same thing with the base coat. I'm going to put this to like 15. Now, again, guys, this is not maybe 100% scientifically accurate, but it's very darn close to what some of the other render engines do with their car paint shaders and all that jazz. So if I wanted more metallic flakes, I can crank up this IOR value under the layered material here. We got our flakes here, and this is the Fresnel shader that we're using to kind of map those on there. And also the flakes are feeling a little hot as well, so we can lower that. Now we're missing one other important element, and I'm going to bring this back down to 2, and that is these flakes. We sort of need a control to be able to control the density of these things. So sorry guys, I'm just trying to see how long I've been recording here. Dang, this one's long. Sorry guys, a lot to cover here with this shader. But if I hop over to my layered node graph here, we just want to create a control for the strength, the density of these flakes. So in order to do that, under the reflection texture, actually, we're going to bring in another colorize node. We're going to take out the red. We're going to set this value to white. I think they should probably make that the default. We're going to plug in this same, well, actually something different here. I want to copy this noise And I think if we do a control, there we go. I'm going to stop this too, guys. Sorry, I actually copied some geometry in there. That command does not work. But if we, this is a copy. It's not a link, but it's a copy of this shader, and this is because I want to be able to change the seed value and have a different noise. Same cell Voronoi, same scale, but just different seed value. If we plug that into our shader here, our colorizer, then we plug in the colorizer into the texture, okay, of our flakes. Now this is actually driving the reflection color. Sorry guys about that. And so if we right click and kind of wiggle this, we should get an update there. There we go. And all we need to do now is we can set this to multiply. So we have a separate control still for the color, which is kind of handy. But now if we go back into our nodes here with this colorizer, we can adjust the contrast of this noise essentially, and this is going to control the density of our flakes. So if we don't want very many flakes, we could do something like this. And if we go back to our interactive renderer, you can see how very few flakes we're getting here. And if I hop back over to my node editor, and if I want a little more flakes, something like this, that's what I'm getting. And guys, this is pretty much a car paint shader with a flake layer. So let's see how this is looking on our actual car. So we'll go boom, 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 pull the camera back, and let's get that IPR going again here if it isn't already. Hopefully I didn't crash it here at the very end. Oh, there it is. It's hiding here in the corner, guys. Just let's give it a second here. Dun, 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 dun. Come on. Come on. Trying to do this whole recording live so that it, yeah. Hey guys, sorry about that little crash there. I don't know what happened. I think the interactive rendering window actually got stuck on my second monitor, so that was kind of weird. I've never had that before, but I don't know if I had to do with the screen recording. But yeah, so anyway, back into cinema here. So I went ahead and took my layered based car paint and applied it to my car here, and you can kind of see I had that up at another angle. But yeah, you can kind of see here, guys, how that's working on this car. And if we, this angle over here is pretty dope. You can see that those nice metallic flakes in there looking real sparkly and good. Who doesn't love a nice sparkly car paint? And guys, you know, this type of shader is not limited to just car paints. You could use this for some nice Christmas ball ornaments. Same type of effect, or if you needed like a glittery eye makeup or something along those lines, this is one way you could do it. So yeah, guys, so there is a multi-layered car paint with flakes. Now, if I had to do like a whole parking lot of cars, I would definitely go the simple car paint shader route, which I showed you in the beginning using the skin shader, simply because of the fact it has the two reflection channels, layer 1 and layer 2, and that allows you to do a metallic coat and a clear coat. And you know, adding in the flakes is a pretty fancy thing you can do, and it looks pretty awesome, but it's definitely not necessary. You know, a lot of you know, commercial grade cars probably don't even have a flakes layer. They probably just have, you know, micro metallic flakes within the reflection base, which is here. And yeah, so, but yeah, guys, ooh, look at that one. That's looking nice. Yeah, guys, sorry this one was a little longer. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. And I started this whole scene switching thing here in OBS. I think that's working quite nice. Thanks again, guys. We will see you again soon.